So yeah, Tēnā koutou, ko Holger Regenbrecht aho. So I'm a little boy from East Berlin who is now in New Zealand and likes it here. And I'm going to talk about a project which is quite a little bit unusual for what we are normally doing. And I hope you will find it interesting, the same way interesting as I do. And I try to share my screen here, share sound, share. So I guess, Alex, you just, you can see my screen? Oh.
Yes, all good.
Okay, good. So feel free to ask questions in between or save them for the end of the presentation. I'm talking about a project which is called Ātea Presence, and I'm just the package leader of that, but there are a lot of people involved, and I will come to that in a minute. It is about enabling teleco-presence with a couple of elements for our indigenous people here in New Zealand, which is the Maori. So I will try to click that screen thing. Yep, now it works. So this is a project which is funded as part of one of the 11 national science challenges in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and those science challenges, and I think there's a similar thing in Australia, and I think ours have been modeled after the ones in Australia. So these are the big challenges the current government wants to tackle, and also the former government. So let's say of those 11 challenges, some are concerned with the sustainability of the sea, and others with aging well, and the next one with the deep South Antarctica research, and the next one with climate change. And ours is actually the challenge which is called Science for Technological Innovation. That, in essence, it means how can we use science for economic development, innovation, and growth. So that's the point. So we are part of that. We call it SIFTI, Science for Technological Innovation Challenge. And within that challenge, there's quite a bit of funding available. Of course, always not enough. And there are 10 so-called spearhead projects in it. So these are the bigger projects which normally involve people from across the country from different disciplines working together on one particular topic. And in our case, that's the Ātea project, which I explain in a minute. So as a starting point, one of the main issues here is that the indigenous people of Aotearoa, which arrived way before the European settlers in their big canoes and their walkers, they are now not living in the villages any longer, which they normally traditionally belong to, but either they are concentrated now in the big cities where the work is, or they are even overseas. So lots of Maori people are living, for instance, overseas, say in Melbourne. So the question is, how do we reconnect all those dispersed people back into their roots, their tribes, their maraes, their meeting places here in Aotearoa? And so part of that project is a Maori-led project here. So the main leader of the Ātea project is a Maori, and is led from the University of Waikato. It is that it has as a built-in element is to always engage with the communities, with the other, with all the stakeholders involved. So that makes it quite unique, I would say. So this is the overarching Ātea project, and it has three main components. And so we are working on one of those three components. So the first of the three components is a core system. And you can also think of it as a kind of a sophisticated database repository. So here everything is stored which we want to access in terms of Maori indigenous information, protocols, tikanga, and so on and so forth. And different people and different groups have different forms of access to it. And that is organized in a layered, in an onion-like layered model, and so that the right people have the right access to in the right moment in time. Okay, that's not our project, but we are working together with that project. The second aspect is also a bigger project group, which is about Te Reo, which is the language, the Maori language. And the problem with that one is it's such a small language that, for instance, translation tools like Google Translate do not do correct translations, right? Because the texts which are fed into the system are first, not the quantity is not high enough, and second, it has so many dialects that it's actually almost impossible to do a correct translation. So, or you want to have a speech to text system which allows to, because Mari is mainly a verbal oral tradition, that can be translated into text, or you want to have mechanisms how to mine text in big repositories. So this is what that project part is about. But now we are coming to our part, and it's called Ātea Presence. So that's one of the three main work packages, which is led from the University of Otago in collaboration with others. And so here we try really to use virtual reality and augmented reality technologies to bring people back into their Mirai, in that case, into their meeting place. And how do we do that? So that's the main question for us here, right? So it has actually three main components. So one is, how do we make that telepresence, that virtual travel happen? The other one is how storytelling can be supported, because this is one of the main forms of giving down the track knowledge, is actually the oral tradition of storytelling. And so how can we support that here? And how can we recreate the space people normally would meet in? So in a nutshell, providing a meaningful tele and teleco-presence interface to connect local and dispersed people. And I have a little bit of a map here. As you can see, it's upside down, and it's intentional, because what we learned in one of our Te'au HUIs here in our workshops on space and time, that the Mari worldview sees actually that whole world the other way around. So our Bluff, or what we would call the southernmost part of New Zealand, or one of the southernmost cities in New Zealand, is up there, and Auckland is actually on the other side. So, and that's why we have that upside down. Okay, so the project is composed of a mix of Mari and Pakeha, that means non-Mari people, working together in partnership. And the point is, so how do we learn to work together when we have very different ways of viewing and seeing the world, also how we explain the world? We have very different ways of how do we communicate to each other, how do we solve problems, and so on and so forth. So that is actually a very interesting and refreshing aspect of that whole project, so that partnership model. And so we are working together in particular with one Mirai down in Bluff. And we recreate that Mirai virtually, and then we let people be telepresent there and support their storytelling through those media. And you see down here a subset of our team. But the team is actually much bigger, right? So the main point here is that the Ātea Presence project is actually a team effort. And you can see here, it's a long list of people. And so the main players in that project is us, the University of Otago, in particular the Human Computer Interaction Lab. And then it's the University of Waikato, and that's mainly the Mari department and the computer science department. Then it's the University of Canterbury with the HIT Lab New Zealand. And last but not least, the Mirai down in Bluff, which is the Te Rau Aroha Mirai, which supports us with everything we are doing, and also serves as a test platform and everything for our project. So it's actually culminating all down there in Bluff. Having said that, what we are developing is applicable to other contexts and local contexts as well. So it is not linked to, it's not restricted to just that use in Bluff, but we are concentrating on our partners down in Bluff. And that's mainly Baba Thompson, Dean Fanger, and Hemi Fanger, who is also an associate professor at the University of Waikato in Kirikiriroa, Hamilton. So we have a lot of things we want to consider in that project. So it's the nature of 3D storytelling. So how do we do that, and what are the pros and cons against when compared to 2D forms of storytelling, let's say like film or read or written stories. And then it's about how do we use artificial intelligence behavior control to perhaps control characters in the scenes. It is about the whole question of plausibility and believability of of storytelling. It is about multisensory experiences in such environments, and it is about forms of 3D user interfaces and the telepresence and teleco-presence experience. Here in that talk, I'm concentrating on three main aspects. So one is the 3D reconstruction of the actual Mirai down there, including its artifacts. The second one is how do we implement the 3D storytelling, which we do with so-called voxel video recordings. And the third aspect is then to bring that together in a teleco-presence environment so that people really can meet in that virtual space. So these are the three things I will step through now in this talk, and will tell you how we approach them also technically, right? So 3D reconstruction, most of you are probably familiar with the main techniques, and this is our object of desire. This is the beautiful Mirai down in Bluff, and here in the lower left corner you see an outside view of that Mirai, and then on the right hand side you see two photos of the interior of the Mirai. So it's quite an unusual building. It's a building with 8 walls and a column in the center, and around those 8 walls there are large wooden carved figures, tipuna figures, so from the ancestors, actually all women, and that's actually the ancestry where the people from that Mirai all relate to or come from, where they are whakapapa to, and then. And they are quite tall. They are about 2.5 meters tall or even taller. And then we have in each of those walls, these represent different themes or topics, including different stories to be told about Maridom. So the main problem here is that if we reconstruct it, how do we maintain the detail and the beauty of it while being able later on to experience that in a real-time, say, interactive virtual reality environment. And in addition, so the whole place is is culturally and spiritually very important to Mari, and so we should treat it with the right respect, and we do. And in addition, the artwork is really beautiful. It was created by Cliff Whiting. It's one of the well-known Maori New Zealand artists who died 4 years ago, and he also designed the Mirai in the Te Papa Museum. And you can see that probably from the style, as you can see here on those photos, that is really his style. So, but what you can see is that the walls of the Mirai are quite heavily decorated, beautifully decorated, and the ceiling is actually left and more untouched. So you really concentrate on those walls and the tipuna around and inside of the Mirai, right? So how do we recreate such a space, right? That's the big question. Okay, so what we did mainly a photogrammetry approach. So we took literally thousands of photos of that Mirai and tried different tools to 3D reconstruct the environment, including Colmap and reality capture and others. And in addition, we also captured some objects of relevance to Mari, like that bird, what you see here in the upper right-hand picture. That's a kakapo, which you normally find in that, and you see that in that photo, in that kind of taonga cabinet, in that cabinet where behind the glass wall, which hosts objects of significance or historical or cultural or spiritual value for our partners down there. So we recreate both, mainly the environment inside out, as well as objects to bring them back into the or bring them into a virtual, or turn them into a virtual environment, right? So, and this is how then is more at the moment experienced. So we see here Noel wearing a head-mounted display and is inside of that virtual representation of the Mirai, which we created. And so we went through different iterations here. So which parts? So in the beginning, we thought we can't actually render all the fidelity of the Mirai in high enough detail. So we had versions where we had some walls just textured, so modeled and then textured, and then others with the 3D reconstruction superimposed on it. But in the end, we came to a solution where we could actually, where we can render the whole Mirai in enough or sufficient detail, and you will see that in a minute. So this is the whole idea. So you are inside the Mirai, and we try to capture and maintain that kind of character and the beauty of that Wharenui building, of that Mirai building, of that meeting place, right? To be used later for storytelling and tele-co-presence. And so here we have a short video clip on that. So we'll just show that. So that's just me looking around. So that's the reconstruction of it. And it looks quite like the original, more or less. There's some artifacts in it, but that doesn't really matter. And you see how it looks like. So we have the center place with four of those Tipuna figures surrounding it. And then we have 8 other figures, tall wahine figures around the place, and you see all that beautiful carved and woven artwork around the Mirai. So this is what we did. So we achieved that first part. I was about to say quite easily, but that's not true. It was quite a lot of effort, and we traveled down there a couple of times to capture the environment, and that's mainly Stu and Rosa went down, and I went down again, and so with Claudia. And so, so this is what we achieved with the reconstruction, more or less, right? So here's another view, and that this actually has a transition to the next topic. So that's, now you see an outside view of, in that case, me standing in the virtual Mirai, and you see in that one inset window what I'm seeing when I look around, and on the lower left-hand corner you see me filmed from the outside, and so. You get an impression roughly, and then we implemented a teleportation interface so that we can teleport around in the Mirai. So far so usual. So there's nothing special to that. So the special character comes really from, so how does it give us the right impression of the Mirai? And I have to say, in addition to that, what I'm not talking about today is that we also captured the acoustic properties of that Mirai, so the reverb in the inside of that building, which is also brought into the virtual environment, so that we have the right acoustic properties of the environment. Yeah, and you see here, so I'm teleporting around in that environment. Okay, so I just try to click to the next. Come on. Yep. So as you already saw, you saw me in, somehow represented with an outside view, looking around and teleporting in that that reconstructed virtual Mirai. And the second part was now, so how do we integrate 3D storytelling into the Mirai? So normally a storyteller would welcome visitors after a certain protocol is followed, and would welcome them to the Mirai, and would welcome them to the Wharenui, to that building, and then that person would talk about the different aspects of the Mirai in person, and other people would listen to that person and would walk around and would inspect the artwork and all that. So how do we replicate that? And there are a couple of different approaches. So we opted for a voxel approach, and I will just do a little bit of a recap what that means. So, and don't be afraid, it won't be a lecture about voxels and volumetric rendering. So we all know pixels. These are, colored elements on a flat surface, normally a screen or projection. And so they're in a discrete regular grid. And so each of those grid points has a different color. And in the end, all those pixels, if we control them in a certain way, will form some meaningful imagery. So that can be, like in this presentation here. So we see that it's composed out of millions and millions of pixels. When you translate now that concept to the third dimension, then we come to volumetric pixels. We say it's the same story. So we have a regular grid, and each of those grid points is is characterized by a certain color, and we place a colored element there, and then so we have a three-dimensional pixel grid, which we call voxels, right? And so in our case, the form of representation per voxel is a cube, but it could be anything. It could be a sphere, or it could be a Utah teapot. Doesn't really matter. But the main point is that that we have them in a regular grid that has some elegance to it. It's the same as we address pixels on the screen in an indirect way and not in a direct way, or like volume graphics, where we normally say XYZ RGB. Here we say it's an implicit position in that grid. And the main point is that it appears as one closed object, more or less closed object to us, right? So we take the second dimension to the third dimension, and I'm an evangelist for that. I think we should not optimize any longer, triangle rendering or whatever. We should go straight to voxels, because back in the days we had Atari computers and they had 320 by 240 screen resolution, and now we have the millions and millions of pixels. So we will have trillions of voxels in the future. So I just stick with the voxels for now. Okay, so I just show you a short video clip which we did before. So we tried that voxel approach in recording voxels over time. So we just, in that particular case, we recorded some musicians, and we recorded some a yoga teacher, and we recorded a Tai Chi teacher, and so on and so forth. And so we record them with, in that case, in our stationary setup in the lab, as you can see here with Stu calibrating it, with 3 depth sensing cameras, can be more, can be less, and it does not have to be Kinect cameras. And then we voxelize everything which is inside of that space, and then we render that as voxels and not as a normal triangulated mesh. And so, and for that reason, we wrote a dedicated render part for both the Unity game engine and the Unreal Engine, so that we can handle voxels. Because normally, if you would render them all as individual cubes, let's say in Unity or Unreal, so you could only render a couple of thousand voxels and not millions, which is normally needed. So I can talk about that as well, but that's the point. So we extended Unity Unreal in a way that we can render voxel videos actually in interactive real time. Okay, so, and we could show in that paper that it's really that is effective, right? Even if you have that coarse resolution of the voxels, you still see this is null, or these are the musicians playing that piece, and you can walk around them, and there's really 3D voxel videos. So we also developed and put together, configured a portable system, so that we don't have to do the recordings all the time in the lab, even if we do very often, because it's nicely calibrated. So it's a system with tripods and a powerful laptop computer, and so we can record and play back voxel videos and scenes. Also can take that with us and record elsewhere, which we actually did within the Mirai. And here you see Rosa and Stu recording one of the Kaumatua, one of the elder of the Mirai, Baba Thompson. And here we see him telling a story, and you will see the same scene in the virtual environment again, telling a story in front of the wall. So we had different recordings. We had Baba in our lab telling stories, different stories, and then we put them together in certain environments and ways. And we also went down to the Mirai and recorded on that site, but it's actually 2 different parts. So one is the Mirai itself, which we constructed it already, and the other part is that we voxelize or record the voxel video of the narrator of Baba Thompson in that case, as you can see here. And the green screen just helps with the background segmentation for the cameras. Okay, so this is roughly a result. I think the next slide is actually the video clip. I will play that. So this is now, I don't know whether we hear the sound.
He ahate me nui roto te ao mā mātou. He tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Nō reire e te hunga mā taki nei, nā e te mihi kawana atu. E kia koutou katoa, nō reire tēnā rā tātou. Nō reire, ko tēnei Hei te pakitara, ana, ko te ahi kā. So this wall here talks about ahi kā. And ahi kā, I guess, in a sense you could say, is about occupation.
So I just paused that here. So you can see there's a lot of holes in the recording, and it's not perfect, but it doesn't matter too much. So it gives you the impression that that person is standing there, Baba is standing there in the virtual marae and is telling that story, and you can walk around and you can listen to that story and you can look over Baba's shoulder and you can see what he is referring to, and you can go to the Ahika wall in that particular case, and so on and so forth. So this is really the element of using a voxel video for storytelling in a certain environment. Okay, so I think you got that, and I'm just stopping that video here. Okay, so now we have those two things put together. So we have the virtual marae, and we have actually three things. We have the virtual marae reconstructed. We have the person who is in there exploring it also captured as a voxel stream. So when I look around in that marae and I look down on myself, I see myself as a voxelized self. So I get a sense of embodiment in that environment because I see my arms moving. I think this is my body, and I'm here in that place, right? And in addition, we have the storytellers recorded in 3D, both sound and the visual aspects, as coarse as they are, and we can place those storytellers in that environment, and we can play back those stories in the environment. And we recorded, I think, one voxel video recording for each of the different walls, and they are told by two different people. One is Baba Thompson, and the other one is Dean Fanger. Both are from the marae down there, and we also put them into the environment with a correct spatial sound. So if I walk around Baba while he is talking, I can hear correctly in a correct stereo fashion with the Baba from the right side of the rendering. Okay, so now that we have those two things put together, now it's the question is how can we access that kind of environment? So how do we bring in other people so outside of you go into the lab and you experience it, or you have it downloaded to your computer and you experience it with your head-mount display? So how can you bring people into that environment and let them experience together the marae and the stories to be told and to be able to talk to each other, right? And this concept we call tele-co-presence. So before I go into how we implemented it, I do a little bit of a recap. What is actually that presence thing, and what is that co-presence thing, and what is that tele-co-presence thing, right? So from my ARIVE lecture from last year, I just plagiarized my own slides. And so the first one is about the difference between immersion and presence. So immersion is actually the technical surrounded, the fidelity of the technical surroundedness of the user. So an immersive system can be, for instance, a cave environment where you have, let's say 3, 4, 5, or even 6 high resolution stereoscopic projection screens surrounding you. And that we would certainly call an immersive system. Or it could be a head-worn display which is tracked. And so when I look around, I'm surrounded technically by that environment. Playing into that, but also in contrast, there is the sense of presence. And the sense of presence is the feeling of being there. So it is not to be mixed up with immersion. It is not always that immersion directly leads to presence or the other way around. Right? So immersion can be an enabling factor, and often is for the sense of presence, but immersion is about technical parameters. It's about even perceived resolution, whatever spatial, audio fidelity, tactile sensations provided, whatever it is, right? Sense of presence is the feeling of being there. It's a subjective experience, okay? So that's the sense of being there, the sense of presence, or short presence, okay? So the next one is, what is, if we have a multi-user environment, what is actually co-presence, right? So we have, on one hand, again, the aforementioned sense of spatial presence, or the sense of being there, right? And then there's another aspect of people come together or connect together over media. Normally, we talk about social presence. So that's a sense of being together. But it does not necessarily mean that we're in the same place together. Let's say if I call my mom on the phone, we might have the sense of being together, the sense of social presence, but it's not really clear whether we are at her place or my place or somewhere undefined. So the sense of being there together is called co-presence. So we feel that we are together in the same space, right? And so for multi-user virtual environments, this is what we want to achieve. We want to be there together with that other person. We want to feel that that other person is really there. So in that we call co-presence. Okay, so the third and the last recap slide is about telepresence. So telepresence is very similar to presence, but it is a remote real environment, which we feel that we are there. And it's actually at the very root of the presence research, right? The first presence research was about teleoperators. It was about, can I feel there on Mars operating that robot out there, right? Even with the delay in between and so on and so forth, right? So the sense of telepresence is the sense of being there at a remote real environment, right? And so if we put that together with social presence, the sense of being together, then we have that teleco-presence. So we have the sense of being there together in a remote real environment. So now we can argue whether a 3D reconstructed Mirai, like in our case, is actually a real environment or is it a virtual environment? So we can talk about presence and co-presence, or we can talk about telepresence and teleco-presence. I do not mind too much because those concepts are quite related. I would argue for, because it's so realistic, the reconstruction of the Mirai, that I would call it teleco-presence here. Okay, so how do we do it? Yeah, that it's obvious now, right? So we have one user in one place, and we 3D capture that user with a number of sensors, and normally we use either Kinect sensors, or we use Intel RealSense stereo cameras, or we use Intel RealSense LiDAR cameras, and things like that. And then we voxelize that user, and then we turn those voxels into an octree stream of data, which is then sent over the network. And we do the same thing on the other side. We have a second user also captured by those cameras, reconstructed, voxelized, and also sent over a network. And then they meet together in one environment, in that case, let's say in the 3D reconstructed virtual Mirai, and the storytellers in it, right? So this is how it then looks like from an outside view. So there's actually the number of participants being able to be in that Mirai is actually only limited by some technical factors. So some bandwidth factors, some rendering factors, but it's not in principle impossible to have many people in that environment, but practically it is probably now limited to a couple of people. So what we see here on that photo is two people in the environment plus a storyteller within the Mirai, and I think I have a video clip on that one too. And you see down here that Stu in one room in the lab environment, that's me in another room in the lab environment. Up here we see my view into the virtual environment, and here we see here Stu's view into a virtual environment, and I just play that for now. I think we are at the final wall, and I will try to start Dean, should I?
Yeah, let's see what this is all about.
Okay.
Kia ora tātou, nā mahare mai, ki tēnei kōrero mō tēnei pakitara. Ara ko te pakitara o te whānau. Kia ora everybody, welcome. And this is a kōrero about this wall. This wall is called the whānau wall. It's basically called the whānau wall because of its association with one of the first families to ever come upon the mata o te whenua, the face of the earth. And it's the family of Rangi and Papa. And you can see here that these figures on both sides of the potama pattern are the family of Rangi and Papa.
I want to walk you around Dean to that taonga cabinet over there. Perhaps you can come just with me, and let's have a look. Yeah, oh, that's very impressive, isn't it? Look, yeah, there's the kakapo in there.
I forgot the name. But,
some kaka as well.
Yeah, some kaka as well. Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Okay,
cool.
thank you. Yeah, pretty cool. Thank you very much, Stu, for joining me here, and see you in the real world again.
So what you see here is probably, it is quite obvious that Stu and I are in that environment, feel that we are in that environment together. So we see each other, we can talk to each other, we see each other spatially, we hear each other from the right side, we know exactly what the other person is looking at, and so on and so forth. So we haven't measured that teleco-presence feeling yet, but Noel will do that in his next study. But I think what we achieved here is actually technically quite complex, and it's also technically quite complex in a way of how do we do the networking and so on and so forth, which is not normally our focus, but it had to be solved to achieve that kind of sense of teleco-presence in that particular case. But I come to that in the future work section, what we are going to do next. So I said I'm an evangelist for that kind of voxel approach, and I stand by it. I think it is really. So what can we expect if we now go from our current pixel approaches, which are high fidelity and beautiful, and not Atari-like any longer, but almost we really have to see whether we can see the pixels any longer. So what would that take to take the voxelized approach to the next stage? So I have some remarks on the fidelity, even if I'm not too concerned about it, because we see that it's already effective with the coarse voxelization. So when we look at what is the resolution of our eye, and let's say we take some reasonable assumption that within reach or within the near environment, and we would have one arc-minute viewing angle or resolution of our eye, then we would probably end up with about 0.3 millimeter resolution necessary to display something so that we can't see the pixels/voxels any longer, right? And if we translate that into current head-mounted displays, we normally would use, let's say you have a 2K head-mounted display, which is quite advanced. So then probably you would have, then it has a one meter wide field of view imagery there, and at 1 meter roughly, then 2 millimeter voxels would give you exactly that we can't see the voxels any longer. And if we go for future high-end head-mounted displays with a proper field of view, we might go might end up with a necessary voxel resolution of about 0.5 millimeter. So that we can't see the difference any longer between the voxels. We can't distinguish the voxels any longer. So that means roughly we are in that area of between 1/4 millimeter and 2 millimeters in terms of voxel resolution required. And the second aspect is the latency. So if we do teleco-presence, if we do any kind of telecommunication approaches, then we have to deal with one big constant, and that constant is called c. It's the speed of light. So let's say a little bit of a mini calculation here. We want to have a latency, that means from our action is initiated to what we see of about less or about 100 milliseconds, so that we would still call it a more fluid interface, and we take that into consideration that we want to, let's say, connect from here to Sydney or from here to London. That would mean that practically with a ping latency of about 6.6 milliseconds for every 1,000 kilometers, that we would have between Dunedin and Sydney one way 13 milliseconds, easy. So we can deal with that as long as our overall latency of the system is low enough so that we stay within that frame of 100 milliseconds, more or less. But if we want to go from here to London, which we actually did, which we tested with Anthony Steed's lab at the University College, then you can't beat really 125 milliseconds one way, which means 250 milliseconds two way. So actually we have to find out ways, how do we compensate for that? And we all know that from video conferencing calls to our partners, that there's a little bit of that delay, and perhaps we can adjust or adapt to that as humans. So, but just for the future of bandwidth requirements, what would we need in terms of voxel throughput? And what you see here in the upper right-hand corner is a recording of of a human talking, and that is a 1 mil resolution recording. And so we can do that because it's just the head, and so we can manage that 1 mil resolution, or between 1 and 2 mil. So we are sitting here where the yellow line is, and if we want to go into finer resolutions, we probably end up with about let's say, but with 1/4 millimeter resolution at about 3 gigabit per second, which we need as throughput, which doesn't worry me too much. But probably this is what we are heading towards in the future if we go for that kind of approach. If we want to capture a whole room or room size structure, let's say of about 3 by 3 by 3 meters with some people in it, some objects in it, so we can. At the moment, we are sitting at between 6 and 8 millimeter voxel resolution. This is roughly what you saw with the voxel video recordings. And if you want to go down to 1/4 millimeter there, then probably we end up with about 90 gigabits per second, right? So I don't say this is not achievable. I just want to say this is a challenge not only for us, but also for the rest and for the infrastructure. But I think that's the way to go. So next and future steps. How am I doing for time? Yeah, very good. So we have now built the system. I would call it almost a minimally viable product, but we will develop it into a minimally viable product until June next year. So we'll definitely have a system which we can give to our Mari partners to use it, to play around with, to modify it, to bring in their own content, to record more stories, and so on and so forth. To do so, we are preparing, actually Rosa is preparing at the moment, a workshop structure where we teach people, ourselves and our other partners, how to do 3D reconstruction of environments, right? Inside and outside, but mainly inside. How can we reconstruct objects, right? So how can we bring them into a virtual environment? How can we record those 3-dimensional videos? How can we play them back? And how do we integrate that all into one system so that it can produce a new immersive or also non-immersive experience or semi-immersive experience on a screen, right? In addition to that, Noel Park is in his final stage of his PhD thesis. He already investigated how does that work is appreciated and works with our partners. And so he ran a series of interviews, he ran a couple of studies, and he will run another bigger study on Ātea telepresence, but that will, or Ātea could take the co-presence between two sites, and it will be an ecologically valid study because it will be done in the field and not in the lab. So we will probably have one place, let's say in Bluff, and another one in Waikato and Dunedin or wherever. And in addition to that, our partners from the HIT Lab at the University of Canterbury will put in some multi-sensory experiences into that environment. That could be some tactile experiences or some wind experiences or any other multi-sensory experiences to enhance that feeling of being there, to be developed and to be studied. So these are the very next steps as part of the current project, and we will go through we will implement all those. And for a little bit more of the further future, we are aiming for a co-design process with people in the communities and to run a series of certainly, or a certain form of formalized workshops where we run those workshops either in that series as face-to-face, as Zoom or Zoom Hui, as 360 video and virtual reality avatars, and with our Ātea presence system. And from those co-design workshops, we will identify the elements which should go into the Ātea presence system to make them more impactful for the communities out there. And we will do empirical evaluations in the lab and in the field, and we will, as we do now, try to combine quantitative and qualitative methodologies. We are quite strong on the quantitative side We are still quite weak on the qualitative side, but we really want to do that. And in particular, as we saw with Heide's talk from last week, so we really want to go into the why questions and not only the what questions, but not ignoring the what questions. And then finally, we would like to disseminate not only to our partners, but perhaps also to software development partners or other partners in the community. And that brings me to the final part of my talk. So what did we actually learn? What did I learn from working in that project? So the main parts, what I learned was there's that 3P model with working with Maori communities, and one element of it is partnership. And you have to develop that partnership as a true, honest partnership between those different parties. In our particular case, it is working together with our academic partners in Waikato, working with our academic partners in Canterbury, and working in particular with our Maori partners down in Bluff. So that took a while to develop, but meanwhile, I think we have a very good partnership model developed over the last 3 years. And just as an example, when we first went there, I was quite nervous, and there was quite a little bit of we had to find out how can we trust each other and all that. It took a while. We were not allowed, for instance, to take photos from inside of the whanui, of the marae. Meanwhile, we are part of the whānau there. We are part of the family. So when we went down on Waitangi Day, so we were standing on the marae and were welcoming with all the others, the visitors, to the marae. So I felt quite honored about that kind of inclusiveness by our partners. Second one is participation. So you have to develop some mana. You have to go there. You have to be there. You have to participate, and that's true for both sides. So our Maori partners come to our lab and participate in our technological research and development, and we go down there to Bluff, and we really try to take part in each other's life and learn from each other's worlds. And then there's a third part, which is called protection. So it should be a safe communication on both sides. We protect and respect each other's values and taonga and things which are probably sacred. And so we learn how to keep that trust and distance at the same time, and that works quite well once you understand more and more about the other worldview. In that case, us understanding more of Te Ao Maori. And the fourth point I would like to add, and that's my final point here, is what you really need for such a project is patience. So it is a process which takes a long time to develop, and we are not there. We're not at the final stage. Perhaps it will be a process of continuous development, but it took way longer than I expected. But in the end, we are all rewarded with a very good working team and with some outcomes which I think are quite challenging and presentable actually in the end, and hopefully very impactful for the communities down there and elsewhere. And that is the end of my talk. Some of the links here and papers I cited, and I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holger. Any questions from anybody else before I go? Maybe especially from somebody outside of the NIM.
It's not a good sign if there are no questions. Jacob, invent a question. Come on.
Well,
do I really count as outside of Dunedin, or?
Well, if nobody wants to go, Holger, in your current implementations, everything is always, so you have always the HMD on because you are doing a live streaming of the data, right? So when you show the video of you and Stu being in the same space, technically what you are seeing is Stu in the HMD and he's seeing you in the HMD, and this is definitely affecting the results. So have you thought about, especially moving forward, and you want to, let's say, compare it with the Zoom, etc. communications, how to mitigate this? So are you planning to do some pre-captures, then align them with your models, or do you say that this is not an issue you want to work on?
Of course. I mean, what you see here, and that prevents, for instance, from eye contact, right? So that's a big. So you get all the non-verbal communication cues like those ones, but you don't see the eyes, right? You see the mouth, and you see the cheeks, but you don't see the eyes. So that's a problem, identified problem. I'm somehow philosophically, I'm against replacing that with some pre-modeled or pre-captured parts, because I want to stay true to what we capture, right? So the voxels are more like you're taking something with the camera, you don't modify it, you just show what's there, right? And pixels, and we do the same with the voxels. So I don't want to tinker around with that. I could, and we could, but we don't. I'm rather hoping for, and I don't have any here at the moment, but I rather hope that we go with optical see-through head-mount displays so that we see more of the user's eyes. Actually, with the North Star you saw in that one video clip already, so you have that already, so you can see the eyes, but it's quite a bulky equipment. We are playing around, we are starting to play around now with the snap glasses. They're a little bit better, I think. They're smaller, and so that might be one of the solutions, or perhaps even the HoloLenses would do, but in the end, when you capture with RGBD cameras, it's always because they are so reflective, you don't see the eyes then in the end. So probably one would have to play around with polarizing filters or with things like that, or perhaps lit head-mounted displays so that you see more of the eyes. But yes, identified factor, but we haven't worked on it yet. Yeah, and there was a chat question. I think North Star, other social issues. Oh yeah.
And so thank you. And Stephanie has raised her hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really sure if I count as outside, but I'm at least in a different building. So I was just wondering, did you look into any of the neural rendering approaches where you basically take in like a voxelized representation, and then on the user side you would actually do like an optimization of the rendering? Because I think this could maybe address this kind of problem with the bandwidth, maybe, but I think it's quite slow still.
So there's a couple of aspects. So one is the one staying true to what you captured. Okay, I just put it to side. So I would still think what we get, we just display, right? What's it? And that's why you see all these, flies flying around and all that. That's what we get. The other question would be, so how to, I mean, perhaps it might even work. It might even be fast enough. We haven't tried it. I think you try a little bit with a video capturing, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, we're more on the image-based rendering side, but I was just thinking, because I think there are these kind of approaches where you still capture like a voxelized representation, but then on the user side, you are just doing basically like an optimization with a trained network, for instance.
It's actually just more, not with the trained network, but with all kinds of beautifying, say that let's say rendering. So that's what, for instance, Bernd does in Weimar, right? That's all those approaches. So we will do it in one other project, but just as a test. No, I don't know whether I will develop an appetite for that. It's like, why would I put all that effort into all those workarounds when I rather say, oh no, I stay with the pixels and voxels, right? And just wait until we are down to 1 millimeter, half a millimeter, quarter of a millimeter. Then I don't need that any longer, actually, because I will have it like that screen is perfect, right? It's without any tricks, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure whether I would invest time and effort into that. Perhaps I would leave it to others to do that. Some computer graphics people like TJ or whatever, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Jacob. We will not have the time to take all questions. So I'll give Mark the last question. And if you want to, just a short answer, if you want to ask more questions to Holger, please come back for the panel, because next week on Thursday, because Holger will be there.
Oh, yep. Oh, yeah. Pressure is on.
So I'm sorry, Holger, I missed part of your talk. We have our lab meeting at the same time, but did you talk about the relationship between the voxel size and the sense of presence that people are feeling and social presence? Have you been exploring that?
I haven't talked about that. Is Noel here actually? No, I can't see him. Yeah, there's Noel. Noel investigated that as part of his honors thesis. So whether there's a relationship, and actually, Noel, tell me if I'm wrong, but actually there is no, apart from very big Minecraft-like voxels, right? There is actually no real effect there.
I'm also interested in if it might be so obviously if you have very low resolution bodies and things like that, but I'm wondering if you can have variable resolution. So for example, you can have the face at a certain resolution and then the rest of the body at a much lower resolution, and maybe the hands at high resolution too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, Mark. And actually Stu's Octream model actually allows for that, but we haven't implemented it. But of course, that is, you would have then, let's say the hands would be really nice and the face, but the rest would be just, a little bit blocky. Yeah, you're right. Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking, I'm not sure if you tried using the spatial software, but the spatial, they texture map your face onto a character, and the texture mapping is pretty good, but the character body is very low resolution, but you still feel quite a good sense of presence because you have a 3D model of the face. The eyes are blinking, the mouth opens, and there's teeth and a tongue in the mouth and everything. So that's quite nice.
No one wanted to say one word because I said something wrong, I guess.
No, just quickly. I just going back on the fact about the lower resolutions. Yeah, people really enjoyed the very. So for example, I tested 64 mil resolution. So the voxels are big, gigantic. Yeah. And people find it they actually preferred that, some of them, because they reminded of Minecraft, like a game like thing. So just a quick shout out as well. I would like also thank Nadia for helping me with all the the extra qualitative analysis as well for some of those things. Yep.
Yeah, we're doing some work in our
really
lab
what
right now on looking at the difference between using voxelized people versus having fully virtual characters that so make a 3D model of somebody versus a voxelized model. We're trying to do some exploration around the user presence of that. But so
I would like to see that study, but we are quite a small lab actually. We don't have that capacity.
That's fine.
Yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, but if you or Suranga or somebody else wants to do it, that would be great actually.
Well, we'll see how we can get, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. But now it's time to kick you all out of the meeting. There are many more questions you will be able to ask to Holger next Thursday. So thank you again for coming, but we have run out of time.
Yep.
Who's our next speaker, Alex?
Next speaker is Eduardo Veloso from Melbourne. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and he has already confirmed that he will be here on Thursday. So see you then.